The cold wind cut through the ragged layers of his worn-out hoodie as Daniel sat on a damp cardboard box in the alleyway behind a bustling cafe. The smell of freshly brewed coffee and warm pastries drifted through the air, a cruel reminder of what he didn't have. His stomach growled, but he had learned to ignore the hunger. It wasn't the worst thing he had endured. Daniel had once been a promising business student, full of ambition and dreams, but life had a way of throwing unexpected punches. A family tragedy, followed by crushing debt, left him with nothing but the clothes on his back. He had no one to turn to, no safety net to catch him. People passed by without a second glance. To them, he was invisible, just another homeless man on the streets of New York. He had tried to get jobs, but without an address, without clean clothes, without a phone, no one wanted to take a chance on him. It felt like the world had turned its back on him. One evening, as Daniel sat outside a diner, he watched people laugh and talk over their meals, living lives that seemed so distant from his reality. He wasn't sure how much longer he could take this. Just as he was about to give up hope, an older gentleman in a sharp suit walked out of the restaurant, took one look at Daniel, and did something no one else had done in a long time. He stopped. The man crouched down and handed Daniel a warm sandwich and a cup of coffee. "Rough night?" he asked, his voice filled with genuine concern. Daniel hesitated, then nodded. The man studied him for a moment. "You don't belong here, do you?" That question hit Daniel harder than anything else. He didn't belong here, but how could he change his fate? Little did he know, this moment would change his life forever. Daniel stared at the man in front of him, his hands tightening around the warm cup of coffee. It had been a long time since someone had spoken to him, like he was more than just a shadow on the streets. The gentleman adjusted his suit jacket, glancing at the empty space beside Daniel. "Mind if I sit?" he asked. Daniel hesitated before nodding. People usually avoided him, but this man was different. He carried himself with the kind of confidence that came from years of success. His watch gleamed under the streetlights, and his shoes were spotless. Clearly, he was someone important. "I'm Richard Lawson," the man said, extending a hand. Daniel hesitated before shaking it, embarrassed by the dirt under his fingernails. "Daniel," he mumbled. Richard took a sip of his own coffee, studying Daniel with a keen eye. "So, Daniel, what's your story?" Daniel let out a bitter chuckle. "You really want to hear it?" Richard nodded. "Try me." Taking a deep breath, Daniel opened up. He told Richard about his life before, how he had been a business student, dreaming of one day starting his own company, how his parents' sudden passing had left him drowning in debt, forcing him to drop out of college, how one bad break after another led him to the streets, with no way to climb back up. Richard listened intently, never interrupting. When Daniel finished, there was a long silence. Then Richard leaned forward. "You know," he said, tapping his fingers on the coffee cup. "I built my company from nothing. No family money, no safety net, just a kid with a dream and a lot of determination." Daniel frowned. "Must be nice," he muttered. Richard smirked. "It wasn't. It was hell. I slept in my car for 6 months before anyone gave me a chance, but I refused to let my circumstances define me." Daniel glanced up, meeting Richard's sharp gaze. "So what?" "You're saying I just need to work harder." Richard shook his head. I'm saying you need an opportunity, and I might just have one for you." Daniel's heart skipped a beat. Was this man serious? Was this some kind of cruel joke? Richard pulled a business card from his pocket and handed it to him. "Come to this address tomorrow morning, 7 sharp, no guarantees, but if you're serious about changing your life, be there." Daniel stared at the card in disbelief. The address was in a high-end office district, far from the places he had been allowed into lately. "Why are you doing this?" Daniel asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Richard stood up, brushing off his suit. "Because someone once took a chance on me," he said simply, "and I believe in paying it forward." With that, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the city night. Daniel sat there for a long time, gripping the business card like it was a lifeline. For the first time in years, hope flickered in his chest. But could he really pull himself out of this? Tomorrow would be the first step. Daniel barely slept that night. He spent hours staring at the business card, reading and rereading the name and address printed on it. His mind raced with questions. Was this real? What if it was some kind of cruel joke? What if he showed up and got laughed out of the building? But deep down, there was something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. By the time the sun began to rise, Daniel had made up his mind. He had to try. The city was already alive when Daniel arrived at the address. Skyscrapers stretched into the sky, their glass facades reflecting the morning sun. Men and women in suits hurried past him, clutching coffee cups and briefcases. Daniel took a deep breath and stepped forward. The building was massive, polished marble floors, sleek modern design, and a security desk at the front. He swallowed hard, suddenly feeling out of place in his worn-out clothes. "Can I help you?" the receptionist asked, eyeing him cautiously. Daniel cleared his throat. I'm here to see Mr. Lawson." The woman raised an eyebrow but checked her computer. To Daniel's surprise, she nodded. "You're expected. Take the elevator to the 25th floor." His heart pounded as he stepped inside the elevator. The doors closed, and as he ascended, he caught a glimpse of his reflection in the metallic walls. He looked tired, worn down. But there was something new in his eyes. Determination. When the elevator doors opened, Daniel stepped into a sleek office space. The view of the city was breathtaking, but he barely noticed it. "Daniel," Richard Lawson's voice called out. He stood near a large desk, smiling as if he had been waiting for him. "Glad you came." Daniel hesitated before walking over. "I wasn't sure if this was real," he admitted. Richard chuckled. "It is, and I meant what I said." He gestured to a chair. "Sit." Daniel sat, gripping the armrests tightly. Richard leaned back in his chair. "So, let's get down to business. You told me you studied business before things fell apart, right?" Daniel nodded. "Yeah, but I never finished my degree." Richard shrugged. "Degrees don't mean everything. Experience and drive do. I started with nothing. No fancy diplomas, just a hunger to prove myself." Daniel listened intently. "I'm offering you a starting position," Richard continued. "Not charity, a real job. You'll start at the bottom, but if you work hard, you'll climb. I did it, and I think you can too." Daniel's breath hitched. A job? A real chance? "But why me?" he asked. "You could hire anyone, someone with a better resume, someone who doesn't look like—" He glanced down at himself. Richard leaned forward. "Because I see something in you. Resilience. You didn't let life break you completely, and I respect that." Daniel felt his eyes sting, but he blinked it away. "Are you in?" Richard asked. Daniel exhaled. He thought about the cold nights, the hunger, the hopelessness. He thought about the chance in front of him. And for the first time in years, he allowed himself to believe. He straightened his shoulders and met Richard's gaze. "I'm in." Richard grinned. "Good. You start Monday." As Daniel left the office, the city looked different. The streets didn't seem as harsh. The future didn't seem as impossible. For the first time in a long time, Daniel wasn't just surviving, he was starting over. Monday morning arrived faster than Daniel had expected. He had spent the weekend preparing, mentally, more than anything. He still didn't have new clothes, but he did his best to clean up. A kind stranger at a local shelter had donated a crisp button-up shirt and slacks. They weren't designer, but they made him feel like a different man. As he stepped into the towering building once again, something felt different this time. The security guard didn't eye him suspiciously. The receptionist greeted him with a polite nod. He wasn't just passing through. He belonged here now. Daniel's first few weeks were tough. He started at the bottom, just as Richard had warned him. His job was to assist the operations team, answering phones, taking notes, running errands. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a start. The office environment was a whole new world. The fast-paced meetings, the financial reports, the way deals were made over a single handshake. It fascinated him. He soaked it all in. But not everyone believed in him. Some employees whispered when they learned about his past. Some even mocked him openly. "Did you hear? Lawson hired a homeless guy off the street," one executive sneered. Daniel heard it, and it fueled him. Instead of letting the negativity break him, he worked harder. He came in earlier, stayed later. He asked questions. He studied reports, took notes, and learned from everyone around him. Richard noticed. One evening, as Daniel was staying late to finish paperwork, Richard stopped by his desk. "You know, most people in your position would have quit by now," Richard said. Daniel looked up. "I've been through worse." Richard smirked. "That's exactly why I knew you were the right choice." Months passed. Daniel climbed the ranks faster than anyone expected. His natural talent for business started to show. He had an instinct for numbers, for problem solving, for understanding people. One day, Richard called him into his office. "I need someone I can trust in management," he said. "Someone who understands both failure and success. I want that person to be you." Daniel's heart pounded. "Are you serious?" Richard nodded. "I wouldn't offer if I wasn't." That was the moment Daniel realized. He had done it. From sleeping on a park bench to sitting in a corner office, making decisions that mattered. Years later, Daniel wasn't just a success story. He was an inspiration. He worked his way to the top, eventually becoming a key executive in Richard's company. But he never forgot where he came from. He started a program to help struggling individuals find work. He spoke at events about resilience and second chances. And one day, a young man approached him, ragged clothes, tired eyes, but a spark of hope inside. "I heard your story," the young man said. "I just need one chance." Daniel smiled, remembering the moment he had stood in front of Richard Lawson years ago. "Come with me," Daniel said. "Let's get to work." Hope this story inspired you. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more amazing stories. See you in the next one.